was Ubuntu, before there was Fedora, and before there was all these more recent Linux distros. There is one that stood the test of time, and that, of course, is the oldest still available Linux distro is, of course, Slackware Linux. And Slackware, for those of you that didn't know, started all around in 1993 was the first time it was released. Originally, it was based on SLS, or Soft Landing Linux System, and it was the basis for many other distributions, including SUSE Linux. And Slackware, for all the years, has always aimed to be the most Unix-like distribution, and basically what I mean by that is a lot of the additional software packages that are provided with it are as vanilla as possible, so they don't do many of any modifications to it, and they don't try to guess what users would want. And quite often over the years, Slack has been known to be incredibly stable and gets updated when it gets updated, is the best way to put it. And of course, one of the initial things about Slackware, of course, it uses a lot of plain text files for configuration around shell scripting. And unlike a lot of these more modern distros, it does not have a graphical interface when it comes to installation, and installing software on Slackware as well. Used to in the old days be very much done by source packages, which you can still do, and now there's some third-party um, package solutions that handle dependencies for you. But originally, you would have to do that all yourself when it came to Slackware. So the current version is Slackware version 15. By default, uses the KDE interface, and they are also working on a ARM distribution for it. And I thought, hey, why don't we take the time and look at Slackware and see if we can get this distro installed. So let's take it away. Not a lot of places do seem to look at Slackware, just because it's not necessarily the click next, but we'll go through it now. I'm going to give it 4 gigs of memory. I'm going to give it 4 virtual CPUs. Let's give it 50 gigs of hard drive space. I'm just going to call it Slackware and hit finish and let it start up here. Okay, and as you can see here immediately, gives you the option to immediately boot up. Otherwise, you can have additional kernel parameters, or we can just use the default kernel. In this case, I'm going to use the default kernel and hit enter, because why not? And today we're just going to do a basic install of Slackware. Not going to do anything too fancy, so let's just get this up and running. So by default, of course, is US keyboard standout. I am using US keyboard standout, so I'm going to just use option 1. So in this case, all we need to just hit enter. And by default, we log in as root. And yeah, now we need to set up the partitioning. So I'm going to use cfdisk. I'm going to use a GPT layout. And you can see the free space here is 50 gigs, which we made. So let's get started here. So the first thing I'm going to do is create the root partition, and I'm going to give it 48 gigs. And then I'm going to check the free space here, and I'm going to give this 5 gigs here, and the type for the free space, I'm just going to choose Linux swap, and the top one I'm going to choose type as Linux file system. We could For more advanced installations, your root file system and your home file system should be on different drives, ideally, or different partitions in case you're going to reload and restart. But we're going to try to keep this as simple as possible. So we have our swap partition and file system, and I'm just going to say right. And we're going to type in yes. And the partition table's been altered. So now I'm just going to quit it. And we've written the changes to the disk. So now we're going to go setup. And as you'll see, it'll first start looking for the partition information. So first thing I'm going to do here is go add swap. And it's immediately picked up the swap drive. And it will automatically prepare it and will check for bad blocks. Okay, our swap has been configured and will be added to etcfs tab. Please select a partition for the following list to use for your root partition. We're going to use first that 45 gigs listed that we created earlier. And we're going to do a quick format. Then we're going to choose ext4. Going to say OK. We're installing this from a DVD, so we'll say DVD and we'll just say auto while it scans automatically. And of course, here it gives us the option of the libraries we want to install. Package selection. We could install XFCE as well. And basically for this, I'm just going to let it to install basically almost everything. I'm just going to untick XFCE because we don't need it. I'm going to untick the games and leave KDE there. I'll leave GNU Emacs. We need a base Linux system. Okay, so let's just say OK. Full install. And essentially it's going to continue doing this for a while. So what I'm going to do is when it's finished with this part, I'll pause and come back. Okay, so that portion is done, and of course now it gets to the new portion is if we would like to use a flash drive or a USB stick to boot up our machine instead of using an internal bootloader, we could do that. Or if the bootloader was to fail, in this case we are going to skip that option and we are going to install a bootloader. And the default bootloader that Slackware uses is Lilo or Linux Loader, which depending how long you've been using the Linux for, we'll know it's one of the oldest ones that exists. And yeah, uh, really, why use Lilo? Well, I suppose from Slackware's perspective, if it isn't broken, why fix it? One of the downsides of using Lilo is if your new machine is EFI, you would have to use a different bootloader, most likely something like Grub. But in this case, we are in a virtual machine. It's a single install. It's not EFI. We're just going to use simple install of Lilo. And of course, next here is if we wanted to adjust the rows and columns and text on the screen, depending on our different video modes. We don't need to do that. Everything's been displayed correctly, so we're just going to keep it with standard. And here, for example, different systems might need additional parameters to be passed onto the kernel to boot correctly. In our case, also it's vanilla install, so we don't need anything, so we're just going to say enter. And where are we going to install the bootloader? Well, we want to install it to the master boot record. We don't want to install it onto a floppy. And yeah, of course, do we want it to load GPM configuration, or basically to cut and paste text using a mouse? At startup, yes we do. Do we want to configure network? Yes we do. In this case, I'm going to give the machine a host name, so I'm just going to call it Slackware virt and needs a domain name, so I'm just going to give it example. And do we want to connect via VLAN ID? No, we don't. And how do we connect to the network? In our case, it's just a DHCP, so we get the IP address automatically using DHCP4. We don't need to set DHCP hostname, and we can say these settings are correct. Again, single machine, single install, etc. Um, we're not using AppleTalk on the network. We're not making this a DNS server or a bind server or print server, so we don't need this. We're just going to leave the default options here and say OK. We don't want to try custom fonts. Is the hardware clock set to UTC? No, it's set to local time. And then what local time do we want? So we're just going to choose here US Pacific. Choose a default text editor. Of course, you could choose Elvis, Slackware, traditional, NVI, classic BSDs, or Vim. Or I'm just going to choose Vim VI. And what is the default window manager for X? So basically, when the graphic interface starts up, what is the pre-system that it will load? Well, in our case, we're going to use KDE because we're using the KDE interface. We have to set a root password, so I'm going to set a root password and press enter. And now we may reboot the system. Okay, so let's just go down to exit Slackware setup. Move the installation disk. I've already done that. Going to hit reboot and starting reboot of the system. And let's see what's going to come up. Now, okay, that's a good sign so far. Slackware, selection on Slackware. Just gonna press enter so it starts. Make that screen a bit bigger there. And very interestingly, something that you're going to notice is the way it starts up. So of course we're so used to these systems just starting up so easily that we're going to just log in and type in a password, and of course we are logged in as root. So you would have noticed that there is no user that's been added, because usually in Linux you shouldn't be using the root user the whole time for doing everything. It's just not a good idea. So we're going to create a new user. So first we're going to say user add, add it to the group users groups, and we're going to add it to wheel, aka sudo floppy. If we had a floppy drive, audio, video, CD-ROM, plug dev, comma, power, net dev, LP, scanner, spin, bash. So to our bash interface, we're going to call the user gosh. And of course, now that we are going to give this user a password, so we're going to type in password and the username for that user. So type in a username. Okay, so we've created that user. So basically what I did there, we manually created a user and had to add them to various groups so that the users will be able to access sudo, power, video, scanners, everything on the network. Then we gave them a password. Again, this type of things that we take for granted in modern day Linux distros. And also, of course, you would have seen this thing didn't start up with an interface. It started up automatically as a default run level with graphics, so we need to actually tell it that, hey, in future, please start up with an interface. So we're going to edit the inner tab file, so nano etc inner tab. I'm using, you can use Vim or Emacs, whatever you want. I'm just using nano right now because I'm being lazy. And of course, as you were to see here, 3 multi-user, so Slackware's default graphic interface. We want X11 or the graphics interface, so we're going to change this default from 3 to a 4. Going to save it, exit, and we're going to say reboot. And hopefully that actually works. So we're back at the OS selection screen, hit enter, so it loads a bit quicker. Otherwise it will take a minute or so to load. And if we did everything correctly in the previous screen, it will automatically load to the GUI. Ha! And it's immediately going to let us log in rather as I use instead of gosh. No, instead of root, we're just going to choose more X11. We could use Wayland if we wanted to. Type in our strong password we had earlier. And bang, you can now be very, very proud because you have a basic install set up. So I just want to see if I can make the screen resolution a little better here. Make it a dark theme. Okay. That's weird. Okay, that just took a few seconds. And I just want to display and monitor. So I just want to see if I can't make this resolution a little bit better for the video. There we go. Let's keep that. Okay, so we have a fully functioning and set up and installed Slackware. So you can say I can go back to settings, and if I say about the system, Slackware 15. So well done. But one or two small things we still want to do. So let's update it, and we might want to first open up our console. So I'm going to just open up console here and make it a view a little bigger here. And first thing we have to do, of course, is let's change this to user root. Okay, now we're working as root user. And because Slack package or Slack PKG, basically, you could say more of the scripts that handles package management now. In Slackware, we want to use it to update the system, but the first thing we have to do is enable its mirrors. So we're going to go nano etc slack package mirrors, hit enter. And one of the things about this is you're going to choose a mirror generally that's close to you. And something else important to note is you can only choose one mirror at a time. If you were to enable more than one mirror, the system will actually tell you you have to disable one of them. That's just the way the system has been built. And United States, I'm going to choose this HTTPS one. And of course, since it's a text file, by removing the pound sign or the hash key, I make that live. So I write that out, say yes, exit. And now I can say Slack package, because we're still at root, update, GPG, basically telling it to get its project keys so that what it updates is correct files. And now we say update. Now it's checking by the mirror. Okay, we're giving that a few seconds over there to check. Something else important to know about Slackware is, and I'm going to show you after the updates here. So we're going to do Slack package Install dash new. Probably helps if I can spell correctly. pkg install new. Looking for new packages to install. Okay, so these are the new packages it wants to install. Say okay. Some of those could have been what I didn't select earlier to install. And the next command is how we're basically going to update the system. So one thing about Slackware, after you update it, you have to run the Lilo command again if you're using the Lilo bootloader, because what might happen is it might update the Linux kernel, and if you haven't run the Lilo command again, then you're going to have a system that's not going to boot. And that's really not anything anyone wants to deal with. So I wonder why this is taking a few seconds to get that all installed. Okay, now how would we update the software? We'd go Slack package, and we would go upgrade dash all. Let's hit enter. Okay, and these are the packages it wants to upgrade. Going to say okay, and we will let it update this in the background. Okay, that took quite a bit of time to update, and you can see it even warns you that you actually need to do additional updates. So we're going to overwrite the old files here, and now we're just going to run Lilo, right, and now we're going to just say reboot, and if all the updated files were done correctly, and we didn't break anything, it should come up and running correctly shortly. Wait for it to just boot up. There, the default timeout of Lilo can be edited so it boots up by itself quicker without having us to wait almost 2 minutes. I'm just going to type in my strong password here. And we are up and running. So we have a fully updated and installed, running correctly installation of Slackware. Running kernel 5.1594, Plasma 5.235, and using 800 and you could say 80 megs of memory and storage. Is only used about just over 16 gigs. So yeah, that's it for now. Slackware, simple, back to basics, distro, and there'll be a couple of upcoming videos on how I can install additional software into Slackware and a couple of other tweaks. But yeah, for now, thanks for watching.